Now, there have been a few stories about the return of debtors' prisons, where you can get put in jail for not having enough money for court fees, then being charged for being in jail, which becomes a vicious cycle for those unfortunate enough to be trapped in it. And now, just recently, this cycle has claimed someone's life. The life of 55-year-old Eileen DeNino. Now, DeNino died while serving a 2-day sentence on truancy charges. Now, DeNino has 7 children, and those truancy charges go back to 1999. Now, the fines and penalties related to the truancy charges were somewhere around at least $2,000 for 55 violations that go back to 1999. So how did she die? Well, investigators found no evidence of foul play or anything suspicious related, but reports from the Reading Eagle say that she was on medication for high blood pressure and other health issues. But they also report that prison officials told them that they didn't issue her any of her medication. Now, some of you may be thinking, why didn't she just pay the fines or get someone to help her? Well, DeNino was unemployed, living with a relative, and was on welfare. Now, to their credit, the 2 judges that preside over truancy cases where she lived were frustrated and had offered to help drop her fines. But like many poor people with significant health issues, she was unable to gather the documentation necessary to prove that she was unable to pay that fine. Now, a lot of that information that they required needed extensive paperwork. Things like bank statements, income statements, sometimes bills, and other paperwork. And some of that paperwork costs money to acquire. And with health problems and a limited income, because welfare does not pay all that much, it's difficult to get around to all the different places where you have to file to get that paperwork. Most poor people don't even own a car, which can add and attribute to the problem. So, while the judges certainly tried to work with her, poverty is a very, very pervasive, very difficult problem to deal with. And laws that allow someone to be in prison for not being able to pay a fine is basically the same thing as criminalizing poverty. And unfortunately, that's what we do here in America. We criminalize the poor and the homeless for being poor and homeless. And we've seen it all the time. So, I want to go to you guys here on the panel. I want to ask you, did you ever think that we would be talking about debtors' prisons or something very close to them in practice here in the 21st century? We'll start with you, Jordan.
Man, no, this is, and hats off to NPR for really kind of bringing, not this particular story, but the reason why you've seen a few stories about debtors' prisons break into national media coverage over the past week or so is because NPR really started fighting on this issue about 2 weeks ago. So bravo, NPR. That's what real journalism does. Yeah, this is, to Dan's point earlier about how we've become a society of debt. We've also known, I don't know how much of a problem Canada has with this or England, but in America it's really pronounced. We've also become a society of prisonization. And so whenever you make debt a reason for prisonization and you become a society of debt and a society of imprisonment, guess what happens? You send people to prison for debt. And also, I want to point out another thing here. Let me go ahead, if I may, and I think without Sean here, the conversation wouldn't take this turn, but I want to go ahead and just throw it out and squash it at the same time. This is a person who looks like there's some personal responsibility issues. I understand that it's difficult to do paperwork. I'm not real type A personality, whatever you want to call it. Gathering paperwork and filing is really difficult for me, but I still manage to get it done. Now, I have support and resources maybe she doesn't have, yada, yada, yada. I want to throw that. I want to realize we're not saying this woman is some saint who is just being completely taken advantage of. But that doesn't matter, because being bad at getting paperwork and maybe being a little irresponsible, maybe even being lazy, if you want to throw out the worst possible scenario, is not a reason to die in prison. So before you go to YouTube and start commenting about how this woman just reaped, what she sowed, no, she didn't. That's cruel and unusual punishment. That's unconstitutional. Failing to file paperwork should not result in death. That is not a natural consequence of failing to file paperwork. So just let's squash that conversation. We'll acknowledge the reality, but realize that it doesn't freaking matter. That's not what this is about. Secondly, I want to point out, she was in jail because her daughter missed school. So not only is she going to jail over debt, over fines she couldn't pay, she's going to jail over fines she couldn't pay because of the actions of someone else. Now, again, whenever it comes to social issues, I'm probably the most conservative person on the panel. I'm real big on, traditional family values and stuff like that. I understand parents are responsible for what their kids do, but at the same time, you got a balance of reason, right? That's a non-issue here. Okay, maybe she wasn't being the best parent. Maybe somehow her daughter was skipping school and she wasn't doing what she should have done about it. Maybe her daughter was skipping school and there's nothing she could have done about it, because kids do that too. But, whatever. Again, don't even have that conversation, because it's beside the point. It doesn't freaking matter. Again, your daughter missing school a few times is not a reason to die in prison. So what's going to happen. People are going to have this discussion. The way news cycles work in America, Fox News is going to get out and try to tear this woman down. MSNBC is going to get out and try to make her into some persecuted saint. And everybody's going to miss the actual issue, which is that we're throwing everybody in prison for every reason under the sun, and sometimes people die for no reason because of it. And that's freaking pathetic. This is the United States of America. We're supposed to be above this. This is not freaking... I don't want to offend viewers since we do have an international audience. I'm not going to throw out examples. But you understand what I'm getting at. We're supposed to be a world leader. We're supposed to be a 21st century developed nation. This is barbaric, and this is medieval. Whatever adverb, adjective you want to throw out, it's pathetic and it's inexcusable. We failed our homeless. We failed our poor. We failed our veterans. The hits just keep on coming.
All right. Let's go to you, Stephen.
Well, for me, obviously the death is completely egregious. It shouldn't have happened. For me personally, okay, yes, the death is bad, but sounds awful me saying that. But the fact that you're charging parents for their kids being truant, for me, that just seems nonsensical. I mean, the government has to step in and say, look, you've got to try and get your kids to go to school. We've got to see you making some effort to try and get your kids to go to school. But if your kids are just not turning up and it's impossible for you to force them to go to school, then I don't see why you should be financially burdened. Because let's face it as well, those sort of fines are going to more heavily impact kind of the poorest people in society. I mean, for me, I didn't have a choice. I lived at school, so I could never play truant. But just the idea that your child, I mean, what she just said? Oh, well, I'm homeschooling them then. It just seems ridiculous to me that you're charging people, and I mean, it's what Jordan said, that you're being put in prison and essentially killed by the state in some way, and that's not the best way of phrasing it, because of someone else's actions. It amazes me. I mean, there is no way that, well, first of all, I just don't think there's no way that someone in a UK prison would have gone to jail because one of their 7 kids, hadn't gone to school a couple of times and racked some fees. You just wouldn't go to jail for that. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Right. It's one of those things where it's debt just feeds into this vicious debt cycle that you can't escape from, and debt itself is a prison, and so you've got real prison and you've also got debt prison, and then you're combining them, and it's even worse, and you just can't escape. But let's go to Dan here and let you get your input.
It's funny. I was looking through the news this week, and I saw a business that has started to do quite well, making bulletproof blankets for students. And I just think, like, is there anything left that we can't find ways to profit off of? And you end up with shootings or job creators now. So I mean, like, that's just sort of where we're at. And this is where this reminds me of here too. This issue, I'm going to go past the part where she passed away, which was really unfortunate, and the specifics of this woman herself and why she was there, and kind of echo the sentiments of everybody else, which is, why was she there? I mean, that's the real heart of the story. Like, why is somebody in prison for this? This is the crux of the, as you guys said, like the pay for the pay system, the profit system of prisons, the prison industrial complex, if you will, that actually was exported up here recently with our conservative government, where they tried to open a lot of new prisons, and we actually had a pretty amusing, almost through the looking glass segment on our national news, where somebody in Texas was telling Canada, please don't do what we did. The weird things that are happening these days with the conservative government up here. But these are the situations where you have to put people in prison. And what's really troubling about this is, I'm really not that surprised, and why I'm saying that is that this is the culture we live in, and the debt situation is the only way the economy is working. Like, the average credit card debt from a single family is apparently like $16,000 on one card. The average debt of the consumer, say like in Texas, is about the same as there's a famous line when the politicians in Texas said it's the same as a truck, right? Like, it's 22 grand. You could buy a truck with the average debt people are coming from, and of course a lot of that is on students. And when I hosted a show back in 2008, we were trying to get people to really start caring about millennials and student debt, and we're going, listen, canary in the coal mine. This is a huge problem. And somebody on the panel made a joke about, well, we'll always bring back debtors prison. And I thought, you know what? Don't be surprised, because our culture is getting meaner and meaner, and we like to find ways to tax the poorest among us and try to make money off them. And what a great way, put these folks in prison, justify making more, building more prisons, and and no one really cares about them. And that, I agree with Jordan, to echo kudos to NPR, who's got more public funding than most journalism, to actually do why to prove the point of why you need public funding in journalism, which is, that's a story that needs a lot more coverage, because it's not just this one lady. This is happening all across different places, Ohio, right through, and so more and more you see these stories, and more you're going to, because that's a culture we have. Nobody's got real money. Everyone's in debt, and nobody at the top of the government really knows what to do, because everybody's making money off that. And if you stop buying stickies and snuggies, our economy's in some serious problems in North America. And so this is a serious conversation. I think that I'm glad somebody shone a light on it, because I don't think this is going to slow down.
Right. Absolutely. Jordan, you got something to say?
I want to not disagree with the point that has been made a couple times, that in fact, I made it myself, that the imprisonment society in America is a real problem, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've started to privatize prisons. But I want to point out something here, and again, I don't know if this is necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. I guess it's a little bit of both. I've been doing some research while we're looking into this, because I want to fact check ourselves while we're saying this. Sorry, and do we know the mother's name? Do we have her name? DeNino? Yeah, okay. Eileen DeNino did not die in a private prison. She died in a county jail. Mm-hmm. She did not go to debt because of fines that she owed to a private company, or she did not go to prison because of debt she had to a private company. She went to prison because of debt that she owed to her local government. So this is a government entity putting someone in a government prison over debt and them dying for it. So that's horrible, because that is an act of evil by the government that's supposed to be by the people, of the people, and for the people. But it's promise. There's a glimmer of hope in it that we can take this horrible situation and make something good about it, because there's no private industry bankrolling officials on this one. This is a government that can be held accountable, and people can demand change and make that change, because these government officials don't have some defense industry or banking industry back on this particular instance that that they're actually representing. This is a government trying to take care of itself, and people can rise up and kick that government out, and that's exactly what the people in oh goodness gracious, in Pennsylvania. What's the name of the city again? It's in Pennsylvania. What's the name of the city? Well, it's Berks County. That's what the people of Berks County need to do, is rise up and tell their local government, this is inexcusable. There's no reason this should have happened.
I agree with you on that, but I would also add that it's the culture of the last 25 to 30 years of that system that has now trickled into the government system, which is the solution for everything is throwing someone in prison. Like, no matter what,
completely agree.
You got a dime bag,
I'm
you're
not
going
denying
to
the reality there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I'm not denying the reality of privatization, and that's another negative aspect of privatization, is the way they do business bleeds over into the non-private prisons, and we see that here. And we've seen that's what Elizabeth Warren is fighting with the government using kids as revenue generators, through student loans. Mm-hmm. Just because the government doesn't make it okay. Like, as liberals, we have a duty, because of our ideology, that government is supposed to play a role in society, to stand up whenever government is being evil, and that's what's going on here in Berks County. This is an evil act of government.
And just to be fair down the line, to echo what you just said, is that this is not, I would argue, a partisan issue. Both governments love to do this because it makes money. Like, going back to the student loan idea and both putting people in debt, nobody in power is going to tell folks to stop shopping, whether it was George W. Bush, in 9/11, or whether it's Obama throughout, bailouts. It's okay, we'll figure out a way to balance all of this stuff. And that's where, the debt culture comes in and starts seeping over into, well, what do we do about the debt culture? And unfortunately, I think you're going to start seeing more people say they should be in prison, because it really feeds into that old school narrative of, personal responsibility. Why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? That we've seen sort of this hostile belief of where homeless people belong, whether how Giuliani cleaned up New York City, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This idea of everyone just go to prison and get away from us. And that's the saddest thing, I think, is that it's about, we just don't want to see it. We don't care if we actually solve the problem or not. We just don't want to see it.
I just wanted to add in a couple of more cases that were also discussed on NPR. There was a 19-year-old that was jailed for 3 days after catching a smallmouth bass during rock bass season. He couldn't pay the fine. Homeless man sentenced to a year in jail, over $2,600 in penalties by he incurred by shoplifting a $2 can of beer. A recovering drug user sent to jail 3 times for being unable to make payments on nearly $10,000 in court costs. These are the kinds of things that we see. These are the kinds of things that we jail people for. Some of these people, I'm not really going to say the guy catching the bass needs help, but the homeless man, the recovering drug user, these people need help, not prison. So really, when it comes down to it, this is absolutely, we're living in insane Dickinsonian times. And I just have to ask, when will we wake up and realize that as a nation and as a society, that you can't punish people out of being poor? And I think that's the important lesson that you have to take away, is that you can't. You cannot punish people out of being poor.